Hello, and welcome to our webinar on utilizing technology for safe and effective delivery of LSVT LOUD. My name is Beth Peterson. I'm a speech language pathologist, and I'm one of the LSVT LOUD training and certification faculty instructors. I'm joined here today by my colleague Heather Hodges, who is also a speech language pathologist and another LSVT LOUD training and certification faculty instructor. So we're very delighted to be here today to be speaking on the topic of how technology can be used to deliver LSVT LOUD. So I'll just briefly go over the plan for the webinar so you know what to expect. First, I'll cover some logistics, and then we'll do a presentation of the content that we have prepared. And then we'll spend some time addressing your questions. And then we'll have a survey at the very end that will pop up. It should just take a few minutes to complete. But if you're able to take that, it really helps us make sure that we are tailoring our content to best match the needs of our audience. So first, I'll just begin with some logistics. Right now, everyone in the audience, your microphone is automatically muted. And that's just to make sure that we don't have background noise from the various environments where you're joining us. But if you do have a question during the webinar, you can ask your question either by raising your hand. You can do that if you click the hand icon on your webinar control panel, and then I'll see that you have a question and I'll call out your first and last name to let you know that I'm unmuting your microphone, and then you can ask your question out loud. Or you can always type in your question. So you should see a question box on your webinar control panel. If you type in your question there, either Heather or I will read it out loud and then we'll address it on the presentation here. And then I'll put up the slide at the end, but you can also always email us. So if you think of something at the end of the webinar or after it's concluded that you wanted to ask us, you can always email info as in information. So info@lsvtglobal.com, and we're happy to address questions after the webinar as well. I also wanted to point out that you have a handout, and you should have been emailed the handout probably a couple hours ago today, but it's also embedded in your webinar control panel. So if you click on the handouts tab, you'll see the name of the handout for this webinar, and then you can upload it onto your own computer and print it if you would like. But that handout is also available for this webinar. So our instructor biographies are on this next slide. So just letting you know that for your reference, we won't go into too much depth there, but if you would like to read more about Heather or myself, that will be in your handout. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me just get back to the beginning of the slideshow. It looks like I hit the wrong button there. All right. All right, so you should see our bios up there again. So next, just wanted to go over some disclosures. So both myself and Heather, we are faculty instructors. So we have both financial and non-financial relationships with LSVT Global. The non-financial relationships include a preference for LSVT LOUD as a treatment technique. And the financial relationships include that I'm an employee of LSVT Global and Heather is a consultant, and both of us receive lecture honorarium and travel reimbursement. In terms of continuing education, so this webinar is not ASHA or state registered for CEUs, but you may be able to use it for self-reported continuing education credit as a non-registered or non-pre-approved CEU activity. So if you are a speech therapy professional and you'd like to self-report this activity, you can email us after the webinar. It's webinars@lsvtglobal.com, and just request a certificate, and we're happy to send you a certificate that will include your name, the date, the duration of the webinar, so that you can retain that for your own records. We do just mention that licensing requirements for CEUs do differ by state, so just check with your state speech licensing board to determine if your state does accept non-ASHA registered CEU activities, and attendance for the full hour is required to earn a certificate. You'll also receive an email after this webinar. It will be sent about 1 hour after the webinar, and it will include this information. So it will remind you if you want a certificate just to email us. So in terms of learning objectives, our goal is that at the end of this webinar, participants will be able to discuss the importance of maintaining intensity of treatment in LSVT LOUD, so whether it's in person or using some type of technology. And then we want you to be able to describe how the LSVT Companion System can be utilized to increase accessibility to treatment. And last, we want you to be able to explain how LSVT LOUD can be delivered via telepractice, or what we like to call LSVT LOUD. Before we really jump into the content, we did want to get to know who's in our audience today. So I'm going to pull up a poll, and if we can have you select which option best applies to you so we know who's joining us. So either a person with Parkinson's, family member, friend, or care partner, physical or occupational therapist or assistant, or a speech language pathologist or assistant, or another category. So I should have this on the screen. So if you don't mind just clicking what best applies to you so we know who's in our audience here today. All right, looks like most people have done their selection. So I'll go ahead and close that. Okay, and so we have a lot of speech language pathologists here, but we have a mix of everybody. So people with Parkinson's, family member, friend, or care partner, PTs and OTs, and then also another category. So this webinar should be pertinent to everybody, but it's just good for us to know who's joining us. All right, so we just want to give just a very quick background on the protocols, specifically on LSVT LOUD, to help you understand why that intensity of dosage is so important and why we need to maintain that, even if we are utilizing technology to help us with delivery of LSVT LOUD. So the LSVT LOUD protocol, and now which has also been applied to LSVT BIG, or the physical and occupational therapy approach, they're based on over 30 years of federally funded research and clinical experience. So LSVT LOUD is the speech therapy, and then LSVT BIG is the physical or occupational therapy approach. So what do the programs look like, or what do they include? So they're structured, they're evidence-based rehab treatment protocols that were developed specifically for individuals with Parkinson's, but we've also seen through research and clinical experience can also be utilized for other neurological conditions as well. So they adhere to principles of motor learning and activity-dependent neuroplasticity. And when we say that neuroplasticity, we really mean like changes in the brain. That's one way to think about that neuroplasticity. So they're intensive and challenging exercise programs, and they're specific to the unique features of Parkinson's. They're also personalized and salient, so they're very specific with specific functional training goals, whether it's for voice with the LSVT LOUD program or mobility for the LSVT BIG program, and helping you improve activities of daily living. So as I mentioned, that intensive training and practice is really key to motor learning and neuroplasticity. So there's intensity across the sessions. Treatment is delivered 4 consecutive days a week for 4 weeks. There's daily homework practice, and that's for all 30 days of the month, not just on the days that you see a clinician or that you're working with a patient. There's daily carryover exercises, which are also all 30 days of the month. And the goal is that we're developing a lifelong habit of practice. So even at the end of treatment, patients are expected to continue to practice their exercises at home. Just like if you train for a marathon or train for any other type of physical activity, if you worked really hard for a month and then never did that activity again, you would lose a lot of the benefits that you gain from doing that. So it's the same thing with LSVT LOUD and LSVT BIG. It's expected that a patient will continue to practice a little bit or a lot every day so that they can maintain the gains that were made through treatment. There's also intensive training within a session, so it's high effort. So we're always working clients to these high effort levels, and that's through amplitude or that increase in volume for LSVT LOUD or movements for LSVT BIG. There's multiple repetitions of the exercises within the treatment protocol. There's force and resistance to build up that strength. There's accuracy, so we're trying to always work towards the accuracy of the targets. And we're working our clients to a healthy fatigue. So that fatigue is always, again, that healthy fatigue. We're never looking for strain or something that's painful, but we're working our patients and we're pushing our patients to those healthy vocal fatigue, healthy kind of mobility fatigue that you'll feel after you would get a good workout in the gym. So what does research say about intensity? So the research shows that intensive practice is important for maximal plasticity, or to make those maximum possible changes. So that intensive effort is needed to override bradykinesia and hypokinesia, so that slowness of movement, whether it's in the voice or the body. So we really need that intensive effort to overcome some of those deficits that occur with Parkinson's. So what does an LSVT LOUD treatment session look like? So it's always broken up the way that you see here on the slide. There's the first half of the session, which are the daily exercises, and the second half of the session, which are the hierarchy exercises. So the daily exercises include a maximum duration of sustained vowel phonation or a long, loud ah for at least 15 repetitions. And then we have the maximum fundamental frequency range, which are high and low ahs. So with those, we take that loud ah and we either go high, so ah, or after we do 15 repetitions of a high, then we do 15 repetitions of low, ah. So we're really trying to expand that frequency range. And the last daily exercise are the maximum functional speech loudness tasks, or what we call the functional phrases. And that's 5 repetitions of 10 phrases that a patient says every day in their life. The second half of the session, and sorry, I should say the first half of the session will take up that first 30 minutes. The second half of the session, which is the second 30 minutes, is composed of the hierarchy exercises, and that's structured reading and spontaneous speaking for about 25 minutes, so most of that second half. And we're building complexity across the 4 weeks of treatment. So in week 1, we're working on words and phrases using that loud voice. In week 2, we progress to a sentence level, so 1 to 3 sentences. Week 3, we progress to more of a reading or kind of a continuous paragraph reading level. And in week 4, the goal is that we're able to get that loud voice into conversational speech. And homework, again, is included all 30 days of the month, and the same thing with carryover exercises. And those carryover exercises are opportunities to use that loud voice that patients are working on in treatment and taking it out into real life outside of the treatment room. And so we work with patients to create those opportunities to practice that loud voice, again, in a real life situation. Those are also assigned all 30 days of the month. So that first half, the daily exercises, are those core amplitude rescaling exercises. And the second half is when we translate that increased amplitude, or again, vocal loudness, to functional, salient, and individualized goals for each patient. Now, on top of this, we also have calibration training, and that's embedded from the first day of treatment all the way through day 16. And with that, what we're doing is we're addressing a mismatch between a patient's perception of their vocal loudness and how others perceive it. So oftentimes with Parkinson's, individuals will feel like they're not too soft, even though others have a hard time hearing them. And if they're asked to get louder, they feel like they're shouting. So throughout the course of treatment, we're also recalibrating patients so that that new loud voice that they're working on in treatment is one that they become comfortable with and will use outside of the treatment room. So we have to address that through calibration training. So the main goal of LSVT Loud is that we're able to get a patient's louder voice into everyday conversational speech. So even though we do those treatment exercises, such as the long ah, the high and low ah, those are almost like the building blocks or the warm-ups to get into that new louder voice that again will be used in conversation. I'll just briefly go over the data for LSVT Loud so that you can see what data has been collected and what research has been done. And there's been over 25 years of efficacy data that have established that importance of that intensity of 4 times a week for 4 weeks. It's really the gold standard for Parkinson's speech treatment research. So here you'll see the 3 randomized controlled trials that have been conducted for LSVT Loud. And with those, you'll see on each graph, or on the left-hand side of your slide, you see the decibels of sound pressure level. And what those are, that's just the acoustic correlate for vocal loudness. So an increase in vocal loudness is a line moving up on the graph here. And then you'll see over the course of time on the horizontal axis there. So LSVT Loud is the only speech treatment for Parkinson's with level 1 evidence, which is the highest level of evidence. And these 3 foundational randomized controlled trials on LSVT Loud were conducted. 2 compared LSVT Loud with the focus on loudness to treatment targets of respiration and articulation. And in both of these, that amplitude, or that training of vocal loudness, with LSVT Loud was found to be the most effective target for improving vocal loudness with the longest lasting effect. So all 3 studies were well designed with everything controlled except for that treatment target, which was either vocal loudness or articulation or respiratory, or focused on the respiratory system. So we see all this research and we know that their intensive treatment is key to make those changes that will last. But we also know that there's challenges to that intensive treatment. So the one obvious one right now is COVID-19, and how are we supposed to get treatment or deliver treatment when we have all these restrictions in place, and we're trying to keep everybody safe and healthy. Also, just distance from an LSVT LOUD certified clinician. If there are some issues with mobility and it's difficult to get to a clinic, there's limited transportation options. If travel to and from a clinic can get expensive, or just the fatigue and effort that can come with getting out of the house for 16 appointments in a month. So there's definitely challenges to intensive treatment, but we also know that there are ways to overcome the challenges, and we'll discuss some of those and how technology has helped. So how can we make LSVT LOUD more accessible? And again, for the purpose of this webinar, we're really focused on the technology piece and how can technology be utilized to make LSVT LOUD more accessible. So technology can be used as a means to increase treatment accessibility for this intensive treatment dosage. The two pieces of technology that we'll be talking about today are the LSVT Companion and then LSVT eLOUD, which is telepractice delivery of LSVT LOUD treatment. So first, I'll go ahead and talk about the LSVT Companion, and then I'll turn it over to Heather, who will talk more to you about LSVT eLOUD again, or the telepractice delivery. So the LSVT Companion, we have both a clinician edition for clinicians to use for purposes of collecting data during assessment and treatment sessions. And then we also have a client edition, which can be used by clients to either utilize for homework purposes or actually do some of the sessions on your own at home. And we acknowledge with great gratitude the funding that was received by the NIH and the Michael J. Fox Foundation to make the LSVT Companion possible. So some of the key features that you'll see in the LSVT Companion is that it provides real-time audio and visual feedback based on goals that are set by the clinician. So a clinician would program the LSVT Companion for the client edition so that the client would be working towards the goals that they were working on with their clinician. And again, they can either take this home and use it for homework and work on the goals that were set there, or they can do it for some of the treatment session. It also automatically collects documents and collects calibrated sound pressure level, or that vocal loudness. So frequency, which is either the high or the low value, and then the duration for the AW exercise for treatment and again, or homework practice. And then on the right-hand picture, you'll see a spreadsheet, and this is just a screenshot of an example of the data that comes, it auto-populates at the end of a session. And so that spreadsheet of data can be shared with the therapist so that the therapist can see how the client is doing either with their homework practice or when they're doing sessions at home, and are those data comparable to when they're doing the sessions with the clinician. Some other key features: it is an FDA cleared medical device. It must be used under the care of an LSVT LOUD certified clinician. So in order to purchase an LSVT Companion, a client would need to be working with an LSVT LOUD certified clinician, because the clinician does need to program the goals for the client. The text and conversation can be personalized by the clinician, so that you see, for example, on this slide, this would be a phrase that the clinician programmed for the client based on speech that the client says every day in their everyday living. Right now, we have it available in both English and German languages. I'm going to just briefly show you a video here so that you can see a little bit about what it looks like. Let's go ahead and pull this up.
Okay, let's get ready. Let's do those loud ahs. Pump up the loudness. You need to be louder. You have important things to say.
a citizen of the United States for at least 7 years, and be a legal inhabitant of the state they represent. U.S. Senators must be at least 30 years old, a citizen of the United States for at least 9 years, and be a legal inhabitant of the state they represent.
All right, so that just gave you a little bit of a preview of what the LSVT Companion looks like for both the AW exercise, then also what it looks like when that speech or the reading exercise is personalized to the client. Okay. All right, the next slide here shows you the research that has been conducted on the LSVT Companion. And what you see here, again, on the vertical axis, you see decibels of sound pressure level or vocal loudness. And then on the horizontal axis, you see across a variety of tasks ranging from sustained phonation, so that ah, all the way to a monologue or a reading of a rainbow passage, which is a reading of a standardized reading passage, and then a cognitive task. And so we see this is looking at pre is the purple, and that peach color is post, and then the yellow is follow-up at the 6-month mark. And so we're seeing some nice changes from pre to post that are maintained out to the 6-month mark. And these changes are consistent with those that reported in previously published data for LSVT LOUD delivered all in person. So with the LSVT Companion, with this research, 9 of the sessions were delivered in person, and then 7 of the sessions were delivered with the client having the LSVT Companion independently practicing at home on their own during those 7 treatment sessions. So it's exciting to see that even if treatment is not delivered fully in person, that we are still getting the same types of results when utilizing the LSVT Companion for some of the sessions. So some potential uses of the LSVT Companion System include independent treatment sessions, as I mentioned, just like was done in the research study, homework practice during the course of LSVT LOUD, and then also it can be used for continued practice after the end of LSVT LOUD therapy. So as I mentioned in the beginning, it's important to keep practicing after the end of the 16 sessions, and using the LSVT Companion is a tool that can help with that, and then also help clients be able to continue to connect with their therapist and show them the results, you know, as they progress after the 16 sessions of treatment. To purchase the LSVT Companion System, there's a few different ways. If you go online to the website, so lsvtglobal.com, click on the store button, and then you can choose it from the drop-down menu. You will be asked to enter your clinician's name because, again, it is a prescription device because you do need to be under the care of an LSVT LOUD certified clinician to make sure that they program your goals based on what they're expecting and how they've worked with you previously. You can also email us or call us to order that way. And then some clinicians will actually have like a loaner system that they might loan out to patients during the month of treatment, either for homework practice or for doing some of the sessions independently at home. So you can also see if your clinician has a loaner LSVT Companion System, and you would be able to use that for the month of treatment. In terms of reimbursement for the LSVT Companion, so for private health insurance, we do encourage you to explore options with the health plans. Some clinicians have had success, and it really just seems to be dependent. There's not a kind of a blanket statement that says that this will be reimbursed, but some clinicians have had success, and some private insurance companies will actually have this in their wording under their speech section. Others, if you just contact them and describe what it is, and we can help you with that wording as well, it may be able to be covered. With the VA or the Veterans Administration, we've heard from clinicians that they've had good success in some of their facilities for getting the client editions available for their patients. And we had at least one clinician from the VA who told us that every client that she sees, on top of getting the 16 sessions of treatment, they also get an LSVT Companion Client Edition as part of that treatment package. And that's something that she's been able to work on through her VA facility. Also vocational resources. So some have been able to get good success with getting funding for the client to be able to purchase and get reimbursed or funding for that device. So we have some resources regarding the LSVT Companion. So there's a user guide available on the website. If you do have technical questions about the Companion, we do have an email address specifically for LSVT Companion questions that's lsvtc@lsvtglobal.com. And then there's also LSVT Companion video tutorials available on YouTube and our website. But if you search LSVT Companion Client Edition on YouTube, you should see a lot more videos so that you can get a more in-depth look at what that's like. And then if you have other questions regarding treatment, you can also email info@lsvtglobal.com. One of our expert clinicians will work with you either with treatment questions or LSVT Companion related questions. And then we also encourage you to review webinars on demand that also talk more about the LSVT Companion if you do want a more in-depth look at what it entails. So the second piece of technology that has been developed to increase accessibility to LSVT LOUD is the telepractice delivery. And again, we call that LSVT LOUD. So at this point in the presentation, I'm going to turn it over to Heather, and then she's going to talk to you more about this mode of delivery for LSVT LOUD.
Great. Thank you so much, Beth, and thank you for all that awesome information on the LSVT Companion and on the treatment LSVT LOUD. That's a great foundation for my getting into telepractice. And so we deem or nickname our telepractice delivery of LSVT LOUD, LSVT LOUD. And so you'll see on the next slide that agencies and governing bodies such as the American Speech, Language and Hearing Association, the Speech Pathology Australia, and the United Kingdom's Royal College of Speech Language Therapists all recognize telepractice as an acceptable service delivery mode when providing speech language interventions for patients. And so knowing this is something that's globally recognized, we want to define what is telepractice. And so this definition is pretty well in line and consistent with other major organizations. It does come from Speech Pathology Australia because they really had a nice way of defining it. So telepractice is the application of technology to deliver clinical services at a distance. And so they do this by linking the clinician to the client or the caregiver or the people responsible for delivering care for their client. This can be done for the purpose of assessment, evaluation, intervention or treatment, as well as for consultation or supervision. It may be that working with clinical fellows or supervising students, supervising staff that's been trained or caregivers that have been trained on how to walk people through the use of telepractice also applies. And so it's integral to telepractice that the delivery of clinical services over the distance, over any distance, when it is not face-to-face, in other words, that it is guided, monitored, or modified by a speech pathologist. We also want to make sure that treatment and assessment is unique for each client and their diagnoses, their particular needs, their particular setting, as well as for clinical purposes. You may hear telepractice called a few different names. Those other terms include telehealth, telerehabilitation, telespeech, tele-SLP. There's a variety of names out there that all mean this same definition highlighted by the SPA on telepractice. When we look here to the US, ASHA is who governs, certifies, and maintains certification for speech language pathologists. And their telepractice statement is that therapy and assessment, when delivered over technology, must be equivalent to the quality of services that would be provided in person. And they further define that these services must be consistent and adhere to the Code of Ethics, which is hyperlinked here to ASHA's webpage. Also hyperlinked is the scope of practice for audiology and for speech-language pathology. We also see that there are differing state and federal laws. For example, speech clinicians generally need to have a state licensure in the state where the patient lives. So I personally live in Colorado, and so if I were going to treat someone, let's say in rural California, I would need to be licensed in that state. So it's important for speech pathologists to ensure they are following the state recommendation, or the state requirements rather, of the state the person is living in, that the patient is living in. And so there's some nice references and materials you can help guide you on ASHA's website. And then of course, ASHA policy. We want to make sure that we're providing best practices. They also have a statement that there are no inherent limits to where telepractice can be implemented, as long as the services comply with the national, state, institutional, and professional regulations and policies. So certainly we can think beyond the US and globally. So if you are practicing in another country, you'll want to use your resources such as the SPA, or the Royal College of Speech-Language Pathologists as examples to make sure you're following their guidance as well. So well before the coronavirus crisis occurred, we started investigating and researching LSVT LOUD to see if it was a feasible treatment to deliver over telepractice. And so our rationale for that was to be able to increase the accessibility of LSVT LOUD. We want to enhance that feasibility of an intense dosage. We know that 4 days a week for 4 weeks can provide a challenge not just to people who live a distance away from a certified LSVT LOUD clinician, but also just in the physical burdens that occur with getting dressed, activities of daily life that you need to get out of the house and drive to your appointments, or look up and find a way for transportation if you're no longer driving. So we wanted to increase the accessibility, enhance how feasible it was for patients to receive this gold standard, well-researched, efficacious treatment. We also wanted to increase the capability and frequency of long-term follow-up. You know, we say that our relationships with our patients go beyond that first month of treatment. We may have patients coming in every several months or every several years for tune-up sessions where they come in for, you know, maybe a handful of treatment sessions to recalibrate their treatment techniques and their generalization of the loud voice into their real life. And if people are a great distance, or mobility or transportation is an issue, the rationale for LSVT LOUD really can help overcome those hurdles. And then, as I mentioned, we wanted to diminish those physical and mental burdens or stress of traveling to clinics for patients. Now, the goal for our patients when we are delivering LSVT LOUD is to optimize their outcomes. We want to make sure that clinicians are delivering LSVT LOUD with the same treatment fidelity as in-person sessions go. So you want the comparable outcomes and the data to support it, that you are providing telepractice You are getting results that are in line, maybe even improved upon for comparing them to in-person LSVT LOUD sessions. And also looking at the growing number of national speech language pathology associations that require clinicians are trained and competent in telepractice delivery in this age of technology, and now certainly in the age of the coronavirus pandemic. When we talk further about the coronavirus crisis, we know these are extreme circumstances where in-person delivery of services has not been possible, and that particularly in the spring and the summer, telepractice may be our only way to reach our clients. As fall time continues here in the US and the northern hemisphere of the world, we start to see cold and flu season take a hold. And so some clinics are starting to limit in-person therapy. And when this is such an intense treatment for it to be efficacious, we want to address that. We also wanted to ensure that the coronavirus was not interrupting services for clients that are already enrolled. And as we see that possible shutdowns may be coming down the pike, we want to think about this currently. And so any patients that you may be starting now or in the near future, they may have to transition to telepractice if there are any shutdowns or are any limitations given at your clinic for seeing patients in person. So it's a great time to become familiar and ready to go into telepractice with your patients. We also wanted to allow to offer services to those in need and not tell them that they have to wait for therapy until the world opens safely back up again. And then we also think about keeping in touch with our patients, perhaps do maintenance groups, which I'll talk about in a little bit, particularly being the TeleLoud for Life, TeleBig for Life, but also just in having that human contact to be able to see your patients and hear your patients. It minimizes the feelings of social isolation that we're all going through. Apathy, when people are not seeing others in person, whether it be over a computer or human-to-human live contact, it can produce this apathy of, well, I'm not talking to anybody anyway, what does it matter? And that's just not the case. We know that if we start to use our voice less, then the impairment is going to increase. It's going to speed up, and we don't want that. We want that idea of neuroplasticity to be, if you use your voice and exercise your voice, you can improve your voice. And so communicating over the computer and then in telepractice, when you're using it with your speech language pathologist, can help combat the apathy and depression that may come surrounding your communication. Previously, our requirement for speech therapists to see their patients in telepractice using the LSVT LOUD protocol was that they were required to see 3 clients in person to ensure that they were familiar with the therapy, that they were using the protocol appropriately and just getting comfortable with it. But because of coronavirus, we now say it is recommended to see 3 in-person clients for LSVT LOUD before you begin telepractice, but now it's not required. Coronavirus has just made the importance of telepractice really come to the forefront of treatment delivery. So that requirement has been lifted, and now it's only a recommendation. When we think about the telepractice sessions, we have a video. You'll see various snippets throughout the course of a treatment session, including setup, the daily exercises, hierarchy and some of the carryover that Beth highlighted for you in the first part of this presentation. So this will give you a good idea as a patient or a therapist or a family caregiver of what treatment might look like over the computer.
Hey, good morning.
Good morning, how are you?
I am glad to see you this morning. I had 2 glitches on my computer and I wasn't sure I was going to get it working again.
Oh, all right, let me just measure my distance here to my microphone and the computer. And we're gonna start with those big ahs. Oops. So, when you're ready, let's start with a nice big ah. Good, keep it going. Okay, how was that one?
It felt good. I think it was a little lower than I should be doing it.
Right, I agree. Gotta pump it up a bit more. When you're ready, let's do it. I want that full 8 effort.
Good morning, Jeannie. How's it going today? See you tomorrow. Have you checked our emails today? What are we having for dinner tonight? I cannot believe how much junk mail we get. Sorry, I cannot talk to you right now. I have to get my walking in. What time do we have to get going tomorrow? Do you want a glass of wine tonight?
Good, I like it. I like it a lot. The goal is keep your voice loud. So even if you jumble on the words, keep that 8 effort all the time.
Okay.
Okay, all right, so let's start with a fishtail.
First one is a fishtail. I had just spent 7 days exploring the Broken Group Islands with the 4 others in my group and was making the crossing from Gilbert to the docks at Sea Chart. I was sad to be leaving because it was such a great experience, but glad to be getting to the dock and cleaned up for the trip home.
Okay, so your voice just was sounding good. Who did you wow with it yesterday?
Well, we had an interview with one of our salespeople, and I talked very loudly to her, and she said she thought that my voice was louder than it had been before. So
excellent.
Another person noticed it. So
good.
All right, so awesome. And I think maybe we're going to get back to the presentation. Thanks, Beth. So you'll have noticed in that video that it's very interactive. The clinician is attending to her patient first and foremost. She is taking some objective measures for data and for reporting. And she's always keeping her patient engaged. She is keeping them accountable, all of the things that you would expect in an in-person session. And what's really cool is that this has been well researched to show and support that LSVT LOUD works in telepractice. These research studies referenced here come not only from our group, but really largely from outside groups, from the Theodorus group, for example, they're in Australia, and others that are not part of our research team. And so when you see this kind of replication of research outcomes beyond the team that created the therapy, it really is exciting. And it's such a great time to be knowing that providing telepractice, providing this therapy in particular over the computer is going to work for your patients. And so for the speech pathologists out there, we have some data that you can refer to. You can use your handout to refer to this as you're providing telepractice, Loud for Life. You will be able to compare your outcomes in loudness level changes, so the changes in dB/SPL from pre to post, and ensure that it is in line with the face-to-face efficacy studies that are the first 3 on this list here. You can also refer to the Halpern study, which documented that use of the LSVT Companion in the means that Beth talked about earlier will also reveal those positive changes in loudness from pre to post. And then we have some of the international studies listed here. And what we're really looking for is conversation to change. It's great if the or reading changes in dB/SPL, but where the rubber really hits the road is in conversation. So you can refer to this if you're ever questioning whether the changes you're provoking in your patients are in line with the gold standard research. You can look at your patients' numbers and ensure they line up here. Now, when we talk about actually delivering eLoud in a telepractice delivery, this is the recommendations for equipment that we have for both the therapist and the patient. So a computer, we want to consider the age of the computer, because if it is an older computer, if it processes slower, it's not going to work as well with the internet and the connectivity, and so it might not be the best for telepractice. A high-speed internet, that's going to be your best bet for having uninterrupted service when you're interacting with your treatment session. Sometimes this means hard wiring, taking the cord from the wall and plugging it right into your computer so that you're not having to depend on Wi-Fi if you happen to have spotty Wi-Fi. For those of you who do depend on Wi-Fi, we see that a dedicated Wi-Fi is the best. So for example, if I were treating from my home office, if I am on an Wi-Fi connection that the kids are not streaming a movie on, or my husband is not using for his work in the office next door to mine in our basement, that would be an example of dedicated Wi-Fi. And then if not, minimizing those other users so that there's not a lot bogging your Wi-Fi connection down, such as people streaming a movie or other people doing Zoom calls in the office next door. Most computers nowadays will have a built-in webcam, built-in microphone. If your microphone does not work well on your computer, you may have to purchase one that you plug in with like a USB. There's some really nice, affordable, low-cost options for plug-and-play microphones. And then, of course, you'll want to make sure you have good sound coming out via the computer speakers or external speakers if needed. And when considering a safe setup for our clients, we do want to have water nearby, but we want to make sure that if the water gets spilled, it does not get onto the computer. So whether that means having a specific kind of water bottle that maybe has the straw or the button that you push to open the water to come out. With the camera positioning, we want to make sure that we can look for any signs of extrinsic muscle tension, strain, or pushing. So consider the camera position, the tape measure mouth to microphone distance. There's specifics on how to exactly do this on the eLoud training and now the eLoud telepractice webinar specifically. but you'll want to ensure that you are training your patient to keep the measurement consistent from their mouth to their computer mic, and then vice versa for the clinician on your side. Sometimes you have to use the phone as a backup if there's a technology issue. Don't let the technology get in the way of treatment. Or, you know, if internet is down, don't just throw in the towel and say, oh, well, I can't do therapy today. You may need to use the phone as a backup if you have tech issues. Quiet, distraction-free room, of course, is best. Having those external cues such as a think loud sign or the loudness diagram, either that you mail ahead of time or email ahead, and the patient prints it out. So it may be optional that your patient has a printer for those materials or for reading and homework materials. Also optional would be a typing stand for phrases and readings so that your patient is not having to hold the papers in their hands, particularly if they have a tremor, or that they are not looking down at the desk to read their materials because they've laid the papers out that way. We also want to consider comfort with technology. So for the patients, do you have any access to IT, whether that be calling Geek Squad or a savvy technology savvy friend or family member that could help you? Discuss with the clinician the ratio of in-person to telepractice sessions for times outside of the coronavirus crisis. This may be more applicable, but even now, do they want to do all of the sessions over telepractice? Do you want some sessions in person? We also see that some insurance companies and some states require that there are at least a portion of in-person sessions, or perhaps the assessment is in session. So make sure you're checking with the regulations of your state. And of course, you'll want to ask that therapist if they are certified in the state where you are living. Do a test session prior to your first live treatment session to work out the technology bugs, and also just to work out the flow, making sure your patient knows how to measure with a tape measure for their mouth to mic distance. There's no adjustments in that distance after the assessment so that you can really get true comparison of pre and post data to report on. So some of those considerations for delivering eLoud from the perspective of the client. And then on this next slide, we highlight that LSVT LOUD treatment sessions are not any different in the protocol, in the procedures, in the voice that you are eliciting and shaping. There is no difference than an in-person session. So make sure that you're shaping that good quality voice and that you are providing all of the necessary feedback, that you're driving high effort to elicit loud, good quality voice. And when I say loud, of course, loud is what the client is feeling. We are never actually training people to be too loud. So some of the locations you may find, the clinician, they may be at their hospital or their outpatient clinic, perhaps in a private practice. I've alluded that I see patients from my home office. That certainly is a possibility. The client as well may be at home or in their office, maybe at a senior center where they have technology available to them, and then also in a nursing home or in a SNF, in a skilled nursing facility. Those options for implementing eLoud may be LSVT LOUD in-person assessment and treatment, and maybe follow-ups are done via LSVT eLoud. The second is a combination of LSVT LOUD being in person for some of the sessions, or for the assessment rather, I'm sorry, that might be that they do the assessment in person and then the treatment sessions via eLOUD. Some may be alternating in-person treatment session with an eLOUD session, and that can cut down the travel time. Maybe somebody's able to make the drive twice a week to your clinic, but not 4 days a week. It's just too taxing, or they don't have transportation lined up for all 4 days. So that would be an example of having some be in person and some via eLOUD. And then, of course, following up with eLOUD. The third implementation option is that it's all over eLOUD, and we're seeing this more and more currently in the environment that we're all living in with coronavirus. That assessment, treatment, and follow-up is all online via telepractice. We also want to mention that there are exercise classes for LSVT LOUD graduates. So you must be an LSVT LOUD graduate to participate in these exercise classes. And there's also the LSVT Big group exercise class, and these are being called Tele-Big for Life or Tele-Loud for Life. And just briefly, we have some information here that on Mondays, we have a Colorado-based group in the afternoons from 3:30 to 4:30 Eastern. And then on Fridays, we have a US and international group that meets. So those are really cool options. After you've successfully completed therapy, you can beam in and do these tele-exercise classes. So if that's interesting to you or to your patients, you can contact us at LSVT LOUD. All right, or LSVT Global, sorry, info@LSVT Global. When thinking about pediatric telepractice, LSVT LOUD has been delivered, and there's been some nice data supporting for some children with speech and voice disorders that LSVT LOUD is appropriate for them. And the same thing applies where it eases the burden of scheduling. We see that kids can really love the medium of computers and screens, and they might be even more motivated to do eLOUD sessions. The data surrounding eLOUD in pediatrics is limited, but in telepractice in general for children, it's very well established. So now is an ideal time with kids being at home more to think of this as an option. This is a really nice quote from a speech language pathologist who implemented eLOUD, and they noticed in their pediatric case that we conducted sessions using telepractice. This consisted of using a HIPAA-compliant telepractice platform, so each family and therapist could attend the sessions with no or limited travel and preparation. The 16-session format would have been much more difficult for school-age children without the telepractice option. So really nice real-life testimonial there. We'll go through this quickly because I want to make sure we have some time for questions, but here are some slides on reimbursement. We do see pre-COVID in the US that some states had been passing laws mandating coverage of telepractice. And so there's an ASHA website here for advocacy, and it breaks it down state by state. For Medicare, hold the thought. I have some more information on this coming on the next slide. Medicaid will be determined, as always, on a state-by-state level, so check that ASHA state-by-state site. And then in private pay, in the US, working with clients previously who did not have Medicare as primary insurance, but this has changed in this environment with the pandemic. So when we look at that briefly with Medicare, we say, of course, check for updates. There is a link at the bottom of this page so that you can have the most up-to-date guidance. But As of July 23rd, 2020, in response to the spread of COVID-19, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services were allowing audiologists, speech-language pathologists to provide telehealth services to Part B beneficiaries, and that was retroactive to March 1st. And so make sure to, as therapists and as patients, to keep checking these resources, because we know that things change very quickly and dramatically. If you do not have Medicare, we have some information here on other major commercial insurance plan providers and their policies. And this information frequently changes as well, so check for those latest updates. When we think internationally, it's similar. The information is changing rapidly, so check with the governing bodies and specific insurances in different countries that you may be treating for that latest information. For example, Germany was temporarily reimbursing for telepractice during the pandemic, but as of June 30th, they're no longer reimbursing. So it's a very dynamic, changing world that we're living in, so make sure to check those states often. All right, those states and those sites for the different countries often. When you're looking for an LSVT LOUD, e-LOUD provider or a LOUD for Life provider, you can go to the lsvtglobal.com website and find LSVT Clinicians. You'll select the desired provider type, whether LSVT LOUD or LSVT Big. Type in your location in the search bar and the distance that you're willing to search in. And in the list of clinicians that come up, here is an example, Angela Halpern, and in the red circle, you notice that she is an eLoud provider. She is also a LOUD for Life provider. So that's how their profiles will show up, so that you can find people who are within your state, and if they have those special certifications to provide those therapies. For our patients, those questions to ask an eLoud clinician: are you currently accepting patients? When you see patients for LSVT LOUD, do you deliver the gold standard dosage? This is the 4 days a week for 4 weeks, individual 60-minute sessions with homework and carryover. If they are not providing this gold standard dosage, then it is not LSVT LOUD. This is not what's researched to be efficacious, and so it's the first most important question to ask. You can also ask, how many patients have you seen face-to-face? What telepractice platform do you use? Number 4, do you have a HIPAA business associate agreement with the platform? We want to make sure that your information is protected and that those sites are safe for you to be receiving telepractice. So for example, Skype and FaceTime are not HIPAA compliant. There's different levels of Zoom that are HIPAA compliant, but not all of them are. And then there's other platforms such as teletherapy or teleplatform. And do you have a maintenance or follow-up plan such as LOUD for Life or LOUD for Life in person? Again, if the LSVT treatment is anything other than the dosage, these exercises Beth covered, the homework and carryover that was described, then that is not actually LSVT. There are no modified versions, and treatment fidelity is key. Just like you would not take an antibiotic for anything less than the dosage that was prescribed and expect it to work. This is similar. Exercise is medicine, so we want to make sure that you are getting a dosage that is efficacious. If they offer any modified version, don't do it. You won't receive the benefits of treatment that have been established in our 30 years of researching this. And so in summary, intensity of treatment is essential to maintain treatment fidelity. We know there are real-world challenges such as the global pandemic, distance to a clinician, your time, maybe mobility or transportation issues, or the expense of travel if they live if they practice a great distance from your home. Technology can absolutely be utilized to make intensive treatment more feasible. And the LSVT Companion might be great for supplementing a portion of treatment sessions or homework practice and maintenance that the client can do in their home or office. LSVT LOUD makes it possible to receive live treatment from a clinician in real time without the expense, time, or mobility that's required for traveling. Our next webinar that we will be delivering is November 17th. That's a Tuesday. It's from 8 to 9 p.m. Eastern, and that's going to be talking about LSVT LOUD in pediatric settings and those real-world applications. There's also a blog listed here for our public webinars for you to refer to. And now I'd like to open this up to questions. And so, as Beth mentioned, the ways to ask questions is you can type the question in the control panel. There's a chat that you can click on to be able to type those. You can raise your hand, which is the icon in your control panel, and we'll call out your name. Or you can email us at info@lsvtglobal.com if you think of a question later, or if you have to log off now because we've been on for longer than the hour that this was allotted for. But I think it was all important information to really go through, especially in the current challenges that we're all facing. So, Beth, anything you'd like to add before we get to questions?
Right, thanks, Heather. We really appreciate that great overview with LSVT LOUD. And just to everyone in the audience, as Heather mentioned, we are at the end of our hour. If you need to sign off, feel free to sign off. You can just click the X on your webinar control panel and we'll take you out of the webinar. If you do want to stay on for questions, you're certainly welcome. We'll stay on for 5 or 10 more minutes and address any questions that come through. And if you do want to take the survey, that will pop up automatically when you exit the webinar. So if you need to exit, go ahead and do that. You're beyond the hour, so you'll certainly get a certificate. But again, we'll stay on and address these questions. So one question that came through, and Heather, if you want to start this one, and I can also help with it. This has to do with Medicare reimbursement. So this person wants to know if Medicare reimbursement for telepractice delivery is going to continue in the foreseeable future, particularly after the global pandemic starts to not be, well, hopefully. We don't know what it will turn into, but they want to know if it's going to continue beyond, kind of the state that it's in right now.
Yes, we're sure hoping that it does. We're hoping that this might be a silver lining that comes out of the pandemic, is that these restrictions that used to exist on telepractice are lifted for rehabilitation. There are some great advocacy work that ASHA is doing to try to appeal to the government to keep this going. So I encourage you to visit ASHA's advocacy site, and they have, you can download copies of letters to write to your local government, your senators, your representatives, expressing your support of this continuing. And I think the more we're all able to do that as clinicians and also as patients and clients, that's going to sure help that become a reality. So there's no official buzz yet, but I know we're all hoping that this stays to be true. And ASHA is working hard to advocate. So if we can support that advocacy, it's going to look even more optimistic.
All right, great. Thanks, Heather. Yep, I think you covered everything there. So another question that came through, are the results of treatment that's conducted via telepractice the same as in person? So I know Heather showed a slide with the research that has been conducted on LSVT LOUD in particular, with outcomes that have been comparable to in-person delivery. So we certainly see that the research does support the telepractice delivery of LSVT LOUD. And then we're also asking our own clinicians we just sent a survey last week to our clinicians with the question in mind on, you know, are you getting the same types of outcomes that you were when you were doing it in person? So we also want to look right now in the current situation and see if the clinicians right now are feeling that they're getting the same types of results and they're seeing that in their client data. But yeah, the research supports it. What we know from clinicians, they're also saying that they're seeing the same types of results. So it can be a very good medium for treatment delivery. And then again, particular because it is being reimbursed, certainly a great mode of delivery right now with the current pandemic, and hopefully able to maintain and continue that into the future as well. Okay. So I don't see any other questions that came through right now. So if you do think of a question after the webinar, again, feel free to email us, info@lsvtglobal.com, and we're happy to address that later. And we just want to say thank you for sharing some of your day with us. We really enjoyed presenting to you. And Heather, thanks for your wonderful presentation and responses to questions there. And we hope to see you all again on a future webinar. So thanks for joining us.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.